Hello, this is Kelly Hamon, and welcome to the Resiliency Coach podcast. This podcast showcases people who have faced difficult times and how they got through it. These experiences are real and sometimes raw. Please be advised that these podcasts could trigger unresolved emotions. Please also be aware that the people who share their stories are here to tell you you're not alone in your struggle. They share the tools and resources they use in healing. If you're looking for solutions for getting through tough times, contact us at www.resiliency.coach. This is not medical advice. All opinions expressed by the interviewee are their own personal opinions and not necessarily those of Resiliency Coach. So today I'm interviewing my friend, Avery Thatcher. Avery is the CEO and founder of the Inner Stillness Outer Chaos podcast and the Flow State membership. When she started her career as a registered nurse working in the ICU, she noticed that the majority of the reasons people found themselves in the ICU were because of illnesses and diseases that could be linked to chronic stress. She decided to get out of the reactive side of medicine and now helps highly sensitive, high achievers prevent burnout and reverse the negative health effects of stress. So Avery, thank you so much for being my guest today on my podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here, Kelly. I am so grateful.
So Avery, will you please share your story with us today?
So I grew up as a very sensitive child in a world that was scared to feel in a very analytical household. So I learned very quickly that expressing my emotions was not acceptable in the environment that I was in. So I learned to numb myself. And I numbed myself very effectively until the point where later on in university, I accepted a lot of behavior and tolerated a lot of behavior that I really shouldn't have because I didn't have the emotions to recognize that that was wrong and that I didn't like that. So that sort of filtered into things. But then as I got through my nursing program, I realized that my emotions made me a better nurse. It allowed me to connect more to people, and the floodgates opened, and I really started to embrace that part of myself and that part of my healing. So that started that kind of journey. But then I was working in the ICU and said, I noticed a lot of people were there because of illnesses and diseases linked to chronic stress. So then I wanted to really explore that and learn more about that and the impact of trauma on the body. And as I was diving into that, I started a little side business, and then I was working full-time 12-hour shift work in a really busy ICU. And it was Christmas morning, 2018. I was coming off the night shift, and the charge nurse looked me in the eye, and she was like, "Oh, you do not look well. I'm going to send you home. Don't come back tonight. We'll just mark you down as sick. Feel better." And I slept for 20 hours. And then the next day I slept for another 20 hours, and the day after that. And it began this cycle of figuring out what happened, because literally overnight I went from a high achieving, over functioning human to barely being able to get out of bed. So a lot of really painful procedures. They discovered a huge thyroid mass. It was about 3 inches, like bulging out of my neck, and just kept growing. And so I went through painful tests to see, like, what are we dealing with here? We had surgery to have it pulled out with half my thyroid. And other illnesses came up and things would kind of get resolved. But then at the end of it, about 10 months later, I was left with a permanent chronic illness and physical disability. So I am still incredibly limited physically, and especially when the pandemic started ramping up, I really started to struggle with my identity because I saw myself as an ICU nurse. And when the ICUs were filling up with the pandemic, I was having the most extreme dreams, lots of PTSD flare-ups, and visions of my colleagues in the ICU being, "Where are you? Why aren't you here to help?" And I developed OCD at that point. I developed lots of other symptoms at that point, and I was really feeling stuck. And the turning point for me was when I was walking on the treadmill at night, because I always do that for about 10 minutes before I go to bed. And then we have this little like desk set up on it. And so I was journaling. and just writing to this part of me that holds this disability. And I started writing, and then I realized I got angry, so angry. And then I was like madly typing away and was just like, trying to get it all out. And then all of a sudden, a switch turned. And I realized that this part of me didn't deserve anger. This part of me deserved compassion. And then I started showing that part of me that I rejected, the part of me that had taken so much from me. I started showing it compassion. And then I was ugly crying as I was walking, and it became very unsafe, and I had to get off, and I was in a puddle on the floor, unable to stand, as this year and a half of grief just poured out of me. And it was shortly after that that I realized if I truly wanted to move forward, I couldn't move forward as the person that I was before. Growing up, my name was Heather. I had spent 36 years as Heather. And in that moment, I knew that I had to start over. And so I decided that I was going to change my first name. And I searched through baby name blogs. And when the name Avery came out, it rang a little bell in my brain. And I was like, that's it. And the moment that I decided to change my name to Avery, the dreams stopped, the PTSD flashbacks stopped, the anxiety lessened, didn't go away, because now I'm the proud owner of Harm OCD. But a lot of the anxieties and the struggling with who I am and how do I let go of the fact that I can't do a 20-minute workout anymore, all of that disappeared. And I really came to a place of acceptance where I can move forward from this moment rather than trying to still bring the past back up to meet me and figure out how to make that work.
And so the tool that you used was to change your name and to use a journal to be able to get those emotions out. Were there other tools that you used or that you've seen other people use?
Great question. So yes, I think one of the most important things for me was to understand the emotion of anger, because I think, especially as highly sensitive people, anger has never been demonstrated as a safe emotion. So when we move through the grieving process, we often skip over anger and just come to the space of like numb acceptance, but it's not actually true acceptance. We still need to be able to experience that anger and get through that. And so one of the ways that I express anger is through journaling. But then I also found yoga. I already had a practice before that, but then moving my practice from yoga to be less about the asana experience and more about the emotional release. Then for the next about 6 months, every time I did yoga, I would end up releasing more anger, releasing more emotion, grieving more of the loss. And so I think yoga was also a really big transformation for me. And then another was to really look for ways to make the world work for me rather than have me try to fit into the world. Because with these new limitations that I have, I had to learn, okay, you really like to read. Reading was a big thing for me, but with the brain fog associated with my illness, I could read the same paragraph over and over, and it would be like, like in the Peanuts cartoons, the old ones, where there was like the adult being like in the background. That's what it kind of felt like while I was reading. And so learning how to read again in a way that works for me, and that's using an app that reads with me so I can see the words tracked, like one of those sing-along song kind of things, along with the words and then me reading it. And it unlocks reading for me. So it's really just embracing the sense of curiosity, I think, has been a really important part of that healing.
That's awesome. I love that. How has that helped you? How do you use curiosity?
I think curiosity really has to stem from your ability to look at life objectively and remove yourself from the stories and expectations. And so that journey towards the objective center was something that I was already working on before I got sick. And I'm so grateful for that, because I really feel like it helped ease the transition into this new version of my life. And so I think learning how to notice things and separate yourself from your thoughts, because you're the thinker of your thoughts, you are not the thoughts. And so you're able to agree or disagree with what's being said. So when I hear, for example, my inner critic pipe up, now instead of her being this dominating voice, she's an information provider. She now, instead of saying like, oh, can you believe that you just did that? Oh, that was such a mess. You messed up a big time, is how she used to say that. And now she'll be like, okay, so that didn't go as expected. Is there anything that you want to look at to know how to not make that mistake again? And so it just changes things because you've now created the right kind of environment, internal environment, to be able to hear those thoughts without getting swept up in them. And I think that's really the center of curiosity, is learning how to interpret the thoughts from the true self, not the monkey brain that has all the chickens running around all the time.
I like that. And it sounds that you've controlled that inner voice, and you are controlling not just the inner voice, but the echoing voice that comes from outside also, the voices that would help us not to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I just want to, and it's all about nuance, I feel, especially in this kind of space. But I feel like control is a word that puts limitations on things. Whereas if I give this part of me space to be heard, then it doesn't feel as stuck. Whenever we feel unheard or whenever we feel misunderstood, that's often when we yell, when we raise our voices, where we feel like we need to do something different because it's not being noticed. And so when we're trying to control that part of our brain, that's where we can really amplify its effect. But if we hold space for it, then it doesn't feel as desperate to be heard. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And how do you hold space for those thoughts? How do you do that? Because I'm sure that there aren't a lot of people that know how to do that. Through my practice, we do self-hypnosis, we do NLP, and so on and so forth. But what is it that you do to do that?
So yes, absolutely, NLP, self-hypnosis, but really it's taking regular moments to allow that voice to be heard. So several times a day, I do this quick little grounding practice. I call it 5-5-5 breathing. It also helps to disconnect the stress switch, so that way you can also turn off your stress and like really start to have that healing aspect come back into play, the parasympathetic nervous system. But this also quiets the mind enough to be able to hear the voices that need to be heard. So 5 times a day, I do this where I take 5 slow, deep breaths for 5 seconds on the inhale, 5 seconds on the exhale. And then I give myself time to answer the question, what do I need the most right now? And what can I do in the next 5 minutes to give that to me? And so I take 5 minutes out of my day, 5 times a day, and it really allows every aspect of my body, my mind, my emotions to be heard. And really, I know that 5 times a day sounds like a lot, especially when we're really busy. But if you do it when you first get up, before each meal, and before the end of the day, before you go to bed, that's 5. And it's really easy to tack it on to existing habits.
Yeah, I like that as a habit. That's a meditative type of habit. And that's great where those questions, can you repeat those questions again? I like those questions a lot.
Absolutely. So you ask yourself, what do I need most right now? And then what can I do in the next 5 minutes to give that to myself? And if you can't do it in the next 5 minutes because you're running around to the next thing, totally fine. But then just plan for when you're going to do that. Because it's very easy for us to set the intention of, oh yeah, I'm going to, go get a drink of water eventually. But then it's now the end of the day and you realized you haven't drank anything. You haven't gone to the bathroom and you can't remember the last time you ate something. So we need to actually put like a reminder in your phone, a sticky note on your monitor. We need those visual cues because our lives are so busy. It's so easy for us to skip over what we need.
Why is it important to know what we need for you as well as maybe other people? Why has it been important for you to know that? How has it made a difference?
It's so much more than just giving yourself a drink of water when you need it. Our self-compassion has been trained out of us since we were very, very young. We wouldn't even hold the door open for ourselves. We wouldn't give up the seat on the bus for ourselves. We just don't have that level of self-compassion anymore. And so by doing these little structured practices, and I have a couple of others if you want me to dive into them, but doing these little structured practices can really help build that self-compassion, which then allows you to set better boundaries because you actually feel like you're worthy of that. It allows you to go after what you want because you feel worthy of that. It empowers you to take better care of your physical body. It empowers you to take better care of your mental energy, your emotional energy. It gives you more connection to that mission and purpose because you've given your body and your mind and your emotions what they need. You show that you care for yourself on the regular.
That's so important, especially nowadays. It's rush, 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 rush. There's this rush.
Absolutely. And I saw so much the links between stress from the person that feels like they need to prove their worth and then how that affected their body. You can see it in like high-level athletes and performers that have really tied their identity into how they perform in competition at the expense of their knees, at the expense of their back, the expense of relationships. Because when we get so tied up in certain aspects of our identity, really affecting our worth, it just puts us focused on all of the wrong things. Because our identity is not what you do. Your identity is who you are.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And you said you had some other practices too that you'd be willing to share. We'd love to hear that.
Absolutely. So there's two other really great practices that you can do to help build a little bit more self-compassion. The first is a self-compassion script. Because again, self-compassion has been, trained out of us. We need to be able to bring it back in a very regimented way, because if we try and do it kind of fluffy, then our brain just dismisses that idea, which is why affirmations are often really not effective for a lot of people. And that's why, here's a little bonus, I also use what if affirmations, because if you're saying, I am enough, and your body's just like, no, we're not, it just dismisses it and lets it go. So if you say, what if I am enough? Then it starts to allow the brain to start thinking and dreaming like, okay, well, what if I'm enough? What if I can do this? It just hijacks the brain in a different way. So the self-compassion script, it has three components. The first is to validate how you're feeling. The second is to comfort yourself. And the third is to give yourself a reasonable plan. And one of the times that I used a self-compassion script was when I was getting that thyroid mass biopsied. And that means that they're sticking a very big needle into the side of my neck multiple times to yank stuff out. And it was very uncomfortable. It was very painful. And while I was lying there on the table, I started using my self-compassion script. I said, you know what? This is very scary. This is very painful. It's not at all how you saw things going this year, but it's okay to feel scared. It's okay to feel all of this discomfort. You can do this. You've gotten through things before, and you're going to be able to get through this one breath at a time. So focus on this breath and let it go. Focus on this breath and let it go. And I just kept repeating those things over to myself over and over again. And before I knew it, the procedure was over and I was off and on my way. And it just allows you to hold space for what you're feeling without trying to dismiss the feelings before, like how we usually deal with things. Is push through, buck up, get strong. It's fine. You can do this. But if you really just step back to validate those experiences, it really helps to release them from your mind and your body. So that was the first strategy. The next strategy, which I wanted to share, was to celebrate three things at the end of the day. So I do really believe in gratitude, and we do practice gratitude in the flow state. And I give people prompts to think about it, because often when we think about gratitude, list 3 things you're grateful for. It starts to become really repetitive. You kind of get into a rut where you're grateful about all of the same things, and it's still good things to be grateful for, but then it becomes just like a habit, and it doesn't really generate those emotions of gratitude anymore. So instead, what I recommend you do is celebrate 3 things about you at the end of the day. And so for us today, Kelly, I will celebrate how I presented myself on this interview, how I showed up vulnerably, even though it's scary for me, and that I really worked to make sure that I was serving and coming from a place of service. So that'll be one of the things that I write down at the end of today. And it's looking at events that happen throughout your day and celebrating you. So you want to make sure that when you're writing these things is, I want to celebrate this about me because, and then it just allows you to really acknowledge the beautiful human that you are. And so sometimes it's that today I lowered my voice or kept my voice low, even when I felt triggered and unheard. That's a win. And that's definitely worth celebrating. So it's looking for those things to celebrate about yourself at the end of the day that I think makes a really big difference for building our connection to our identity.
So I love that practice.
It's a beautiful one. I really enjoy it.
Absolutely. If somebody's going through possibly some of the things that you've gone through, what's one piece of advice that you would give them?
Even though it's scary, reach out for help. Throughout this entire process, my husband, bless his heart, he was very patient because he knew about my history, my trauma history, and my struggle to trust people. And so started off that he knew when the appointments would be, but he wasn't allowed to come. And then eventually he was allowed to come and be in the parking lot. And then he was allowed to come and be in the building. And then he was allowed to come and be in the waiting room. And finally, he was allowed to come and be in the doctor's office with me when they delivered more news. And when that happened, I was like, oh, why didn't I think of this before? This is so much better to have somebody that I love and trust and feel safe around. And it really deepened our relationship once I finally let him in through that last little bit of the curtain. And so looking for somebody to start letting in, to really let them in, because as a highly sensitive person, it's very easy for us to be the go-to rock for everybody else to lean on. But when we need someone to lean on, we only lean on ourselves. So starting small, but working up to the point where you have that trust with somebody else to lean on is absolutely essential. It made the biggest difference. Just took me a while to get there.
Absolutely. We all need somebody in our corner. We all need a cheerleader of some sort. And it may not be a friend that we have right now. It may not be a family member either, but there's someone out there that's willing to assist you. There is always someone out there. So that is excellent advice, to reach out, to seek out assistance, support through that journey, whatever the journey is, but to seek somebody or person or organization to assist you through the process.
And I know it's scary. And even hearing this, you might feel like you're shutting down. Be like, nah, that's not for me. But you're not here listening to this podcast because you're happy with everything in your life and you don't want anything to change. So small steps out of your comfort zone, friend. It'll be worth it.
Absolutely.
And one of my favorite phrases that I try and apply in all kinds of areas of my life is to dig the well before you're thirsty. So you want to start testing those relationships before you really need somebody to lean on. Start giving people a little bit more of you. Start sharing a little bit more. Start seeing how comfortable it is to share this person and how they respond to it. Because then you'll be able to know ahead of time who your rock could be when you actually really, really need somebody.
Test those waters of trust and friendship. Absolutely. Yeah.
These relationships become so much more deep and meaningful, even when you don't need the rock. It unlocks another level that's so beautiful to experience.
Yeah, all human beings need some sort of connection.
I have a really personal story about that. So I was working on a ICU ward, and there was this one patient that had come in with a massive parasite infection. It was like all throughout her body, and then she was passing some of them, and it was just like she just felt so dirty. And so I came in and I just was like talking with her and rubbing her shoulder, and I didn't have gloves on or anything, and she's just like, that was the most amazing thing you could have done for me today, because you touched me like I was a human. And we just sometimes forget how important safe and gentle touch is. So yeah, just touching somebody's shoulder can make a huge difference.
So thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And if somebody wanted to contact you, how would they do that?
Thank you for that, Kelly. So if they want to stay in touch with me, they can check out my website, which is becomingavery.com, or they can find me on Instagram, also at becomingavery.
And can you spell your name for them?
Absolutely. It's Avery.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you again, Avery, for sharing your story with us today.
Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for creating a safe space to really open and share so vulnerably.
Thank you, audience, for listening to Avery. And remember, there is a way through your difficulty. Please seek out resources and people who can and will help you. Now, if you're looking for alternative tools for handling difficult times or moving ahead in life, contact us at www.resiliency.coach. Hope you all have a blessed day and a wonderful life. Goodbye.